Now, as you know, yesterday was International Women's Day. I suppose it's somewhere in the world it is still the case. The Australian National Committee for UN Women has women's economic empowerment as its theme. And joining us now from Canberra is Executive Director Julie McKay. Look, thanks very much for your time today. Look, just to start with, the theme being economic empowerment, women's economic empowerment. How much is there still a disparity, an inequality, if you like, between women and men in that case?
Look, the theme this year is economic empowerment, and it's been a huge opportunity for us to profile what's happening here in Australia, but also what's happening globally in the space. What we know is that 70% of the world's poor are women, that women do 2/3 of the world's work, but earn less than 10% of the world's income. So there's huge global disparities for women in the economic empowerment space. Here in Australia, women are 2.5 times more likely to live in poverty, and still 27% of women have no superannuation. So there's a long way to go here in Australia as well.
How do you even go about starting to address, obviously, what is such a sizable problem?
Look, I think the issue firstly is about getting awareness out there. When we talk to young women, when we talk to business leaders, there's still a lot of people who say, look, I'm sure it's not really that much of a problem. So for us, the first step is actually raising awareness about just how far we still have to go. It's then about starting to talk to women and men about how do you actually overcome some of the issues. So here in Australia, we're talking about fair and decent work, talking to women about advocating effectively for their right to leadership opportunities, access to decision-making roles, but also working with the government to ensure that paid parental leave is something that's really working for people across the board. We're also looking at issues like childcare and asking the government for an investigation into the cost of what tax deductibility for childcare would look like.
Before we get to the government stuff, I want to get your thoughts on the private sector, the corporate response. I mean, is it where it should be? Obviously, with representation, not just on boards, but in senior management, executive level. I mean, is there a willingness and openness, enough progression on that face for women?
Look, my answer there would be absolutely not. I think there is a huge amount of discussion and debate happening in the corporate sector at the moment, and there's really good intentions and momentum is building. We are seeing some progress. We've seen now the statistic of women on boards rising to 13.8%, which is a lot better than it was a couple of years ago, but it's a long way from anyone's measure of equality. I think the challenge for the corporate sector is, we've been pushing, different programs, mentoring, sponsorship for a number of years. We actually now need to really look at what is it that's going to take us from where we are today to where we want to be towards genuine equality. And I think, for me, I think there needs to be some level of recognition that if progress towards all of the targets that are being set isn't made, that actually we look at a quota system to try and really force the issue.
Do you worry that could potentially engender maybe a sense of displeasure that it may be a forced issue, whereas the person getting the seat on the board or the position in senior management may be getting it on simply because they're a woman as opposed to simply because they are the best candidate for the job?
I think the debate in Australia about quotas has become really muddied, and I actually think there's a lot of confusion about what we're talking about when we talk about quotas. The UN talks about temporary special measures, so measures that are taken to address an inequality that are special and for a specific purpose, but that are also temporary. We're not talking about forever, we're talking about a short-term injection of policy to ensure that change happens. What we know around the world is that in the countries that have achieved parity in representation of women, they have had quotas, and all of them have tried programs that include targets and sponsorship and mentoring. But the reality has been for comparable countries that quotas have been the answer. So no, I don't think that we're suddenly going to end up with a whole lot of women who don't have the right qualifications. I think what we would start to see is the women who do have the qualifications actually being offered the positions.
Now, from the government side of things, obviously we had that Fair Work, Equal Pay decision. I mean, is this the beginning, do you think? And in particular, I suppose reassessing the legislation. I mean, what would you like to see be done?
So two slightly separate pieces. Obviously, the recognition of the ASU pay case, where we've acknowledged that gender was one of the key reasons why this sector was completely underpaid, is a huge step, and I think it's a really exciting step for our sector to be recognised in the same way that many others have been for a long time. On the other side, the Equal Opportunity for Women in the Workplace Agency review that's been going on and the bill that's been tabled this week, again, we see it as a step forward, and we've been very supportive of the government's efforts to review the Act. But I guess for us, what we'd really like to see is some level of consequence, that if companies aren't compliant with the Act, at the moment we have the ability to sort of name and shame them, but really what we think should be there is some capacity to actually force companies to comply. So whether that's fines, whether that's a system of not enabling those companies to receive government contracts, there's technically that ability at the moment, but it's not enforced. So we'd like to see a strengthening of the consequence, because indeed we know that that often it is a fear of consequence that does drive behavioural change.
What sort of a response from the government have you had? I mean, indeed, have you broached the subject of potential penalties with the government in regards to that?
Look, I think the review that's been undertaken over the last couple of years is the government's response, and as I said, we've welcomed the review, and I know that there's huge commitment from EOA to really strengthening the processes and the way in which EOA was able to support Australian businesses to achieve gender equality. So I definitely think they're looking forward to the review, the bill being passed, hopefully.
Julie McKay, got to leave it there. Thanks very much for your time today.
Thanks for having me on the show.